All right, guys, today we're here to talk about the St. Louis Blues, their season that was in 2022, 2023, and the season what is going to be now that the draft is over and free agency is about 2 weeks into it now. Um, just sort of want to discuss where they came from in the last season, how they stacked up, and what they've sort of done so far in preparation to next year, and where we sort of see them where we see them going, I guess, not just for next year, but also, the future. So yeah, we'll get it kick started with the season that was last season. The 2022-23 season was a bit of a disappointment for St. Louis Blues and St. Louis Blues fans, most likely. Um, had a few injury worries throughout the season, uh, which sort of just didn't help their cause. They seem to be they seem to show signs that maybe they could have pushed and made that sort of a playoff push, and then they'd fall down again. So ultimately, they weren't really ever around the mark or where they needed to be throughout the season. Even though they did have those glimpses of, oh, maybe they can turn this around. So yeah, they finished 23rd overall in the standings. They had 37 wins and a total of 81 points. It's not really good enough for a St. Louis Blues side with their profile, which we'll sort of go through a little bit more in the video um, on the future discussions shortly. But yeah, ultimately last season saw them miss the playoffs when most probably would have thought, they should really be slipping into a wild card spot. They did have to move on the likes of Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly traded out at the deadline day due to, obviously not being able to get a commitment from them ongoing, and decided to move them on for assets. So yeah, I didn't mind those moves because they weren't going to make playoffs. The two players obviously weren't going to re-sign with them, and best to get as much as you can. Tarasenko was the interesting one, just with his injury history. I kind of I like Tarasenko. I think he's been a fantastic player, but I thought that was a great move to move him on, get what you could for him, rather than try and sign him to an extension. Although I think he was too keen on it, but more of what sort of extension do you sign a guy like that to that has had his injury worries? Do you sign him to a 2-3 year extension? Is he going to take that? Um, so yeah, I thought it was a really good move. Ship out you know, two players who've obviously brought a lot to St. Louis. They were a big part of that cup win, uh, and have been a massive part of their core for so long. But yeah, I thought it was a great time to move and picked up some reasonable assets for them. And yeah, then move on, helps them move forward in what looks to be like a bit of a retool. Uh, so yeah, a bit of a disappointment in 2022-23, but they did have a couple of glimpses and a few things that sort of went their way. So as for the upcoming season and some of the moves that they have made in the draft or over free agency or trades, I'll hand over to Jaden to run you through the current lineup as per cap friendly.
Alrighty. So they've got at the moment 1.5 mil in free cap space. Your first line's looking like Saar, Thomas, and Kairu. Though Buchnevich did play better last year, so it'd be interesting to see if he played on first line. You got Buchnevich, Hayes, and Kapanen on the second. Hayes they brought in, and just for a 6th-round pick, and they got the salary half retained, so 3.5 mil for Kevin Hayes, not bad. Neighbours, Shen and Vrana on the third. Blaze, Alexandre, and Torochenko on the fourth. It's a little bit lacking there. There's a little risky contracts in regards to some of those, like the Varana, who did play well in the 20 game span he did last year. So it does look like that's panning out. But I just thought I'd note that, and they do have to sign Torpachenko. Nick Leddy, this is the issue with this team. Somewhat like this is where you find some of the core issues with this team. You got Nick Leddy, Parayko, Krug, Falk, and Scandella and Rosen as your defenders, your core defenders. Their top four all have no trade clauses, so and they're all signed for at least 3 years. Three for Leddy, four for Krug and Falk, and more for Parayko. So they're kind of stuck with that core no matter what. They have tried to move Krug. There were talks about Parayko. There's reasons for that because they have abysmal plus minuses compared to other things. Same with Kairu. I thought I'd just note that, but I will get into that later. Goalies, yeah, Binnington, the controversial man. Uh, yeah, I guess that's what you can say with Binnington, right? He's the controversial man. They don't really have a backup. They got Joel Hofer, who only played 6 games last season, so a little bit untested in some ways. Scratches, they bring back Sundqvist, who obviously helped win that cup in 2018. So they bring him back just for 1 year, get some, needed veterancy. Got Nathan, needed veterancy, like this whole team's veterancy, but they get that they get that man back. Nathan Walker, Bortuzzo,
Yeah.
and they do bring in Mac Eakin. Oh my god, I said it perfectly though earlier. Mac Eakin. Um,
You
he,
kicking?
yeah, they bring him for 2 years, mid-league minimum on a one-way contract. So we'll see if he plays. Obviously, old side, so maybe some injuries throughout, and he might step up. So notable losses. Thomas Grease does retire after I think it was like 14 seasons. So that's their backup gone in goaltending. Highmore goes to Ottawa. Pitlick, New York Rangers. Santini only played like 4 games for him. LA. Todd, San Jose. Brown to Tampa, and Lyle to Calgary. And just notable things on the drafts. Two people from the 22 draft getting ELCs in Buchinger and Marc Andre Gaudet. Though they didn't have many picks in that draft, only 6, where compared to this year's. I guess where do you start with this team, right? To break it down, it's actually really hard just to go from the top down
It's
with
a
this
tough
team.
one.
No, this
It's
is
a
probably
tough
one of
one.
the hardest teams to talk about on how you go about it because they got the core four with no trade clauses, so you can't really move them unless they really want to go to the team that they're going to. You got no trade clauses or some sort of restrictions on a few of your forwards as well. So there's limit on who you can move. So the retooling is very hard to do for this team. Interesting thing I noted or noticed: 8 out of their 24 defensemen in the whole entire organization are left defenders, or at least listed as left defenders. Last 2 drafts, 7 out of the 7 defenders they have drafted are all left defenders as well. So sure, some people can play right side and whatnot. I thought that was just interesting to note. I'd be worried if I was a left defender on this team looking at that. But yeah, I just think that's interesting to note that they're lacking right defenders, and we do know sometimes right defenders are a premium to get. So that was something very interesting. I thought, they're probably going to be making moves on in the future is moving some sort of left defenders either in depth or on the blue line. They bring in Kevin Hayes. I guess I'll just touch on that one before I hand it over to you. They get him for a few years. He's he's very lazy. We can basically say that he has a horrible plus minus as of last year. It was like -22. The year before that was -20. He's pretty lazy defensively, and I feel like that's where this team needed to build was more defensive. I don't mind it though. For 3.5 for Kevin Hayes, it's cheap, and you can probably get away with it. It helps build your team on a really salary cap strict team because only 1.5 mil left, and they've still got a lot of improvements to make, honestly. And so, not bad. Only lose a 6 for it. The only issue is the term. He's got 3 years left. It could go sour. It could not, but it's only 3.5. So I don't mind that. I don't rate him though. I don't as the defensive side of things, and I don't know if that's the player they need because they need more defensive minded players. and I guess I'll get into that later, but I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, it's yeah, like you said before, it's kind of a difficult team to sum up, really. I think they have to be going for it. We said it's more of a retool than going into a rebuild. Uh, the question is, have they done enough of a retool? I know they picked up Verana and Kapanen late last season, who both performed relatively good for what their contracts are worth. Um, Question is, can they continue that? Kevin Hayes pick up, and obviously Oscar Sundqvist probably is that sort of player that comes in and out of the lineup as replacement to a couple others. And I guess if he's performing, he might sort of stick around in that lineup. But yeah, like, does this side have enough to be a contender? And that's where I get sort of stuck on it, because I don't like seeing Brandon Saad on the first line. I think, yep, he used to have that ability. Does he have it anymore? I I don't know. That's the question. I feel like he's not the first liner that
Yeah,
he,
Butch Davis should be, yeah.
yeah,
After
and I know
last
you
year.
got Buchnevich there as well, but I even question that. Thomas, it's funny, like you mentioned, the no trade clauses and no move clauses and stuff. Rob Thomas and Kyrou, the two core players that they probably don't want to move,
Yep.
are the only two that don't currently have a no move or no trade clause. So yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, it's just given the profile of this side, as you were touching on, it's they're all older veteran players. They're all 30 plus, basically, other than, really Kyrou and Thomas and a couple of other players. But you look at, Shen 31, Saad 30, Hayes 31. Their whole defense line is above 30 pretty much, except for well, I mean, Kyle Rosen on that third line, and he's 29. So that's your youngest defender, is 29 years of age. So if this team isn't good enough to contend, they've really got to ask themselves what they need to do to fix that. How do you retool this side um, outside of what they've done so far this year? They don't have a huge amount of cap space. They've got some relatively longish term contracts with some questionable defensemen like Falk, Krug, Pareko. They're all signed. Falk and Krug signed for the next 4 years at 6.5, and Pareko signed for the next seven, I think, at 6.5. So, you know, and they've all got no trade clauses. So it's quite difficult to move any of them on to free up somewhat of a somewhat cap space and try and make some moves around it. Uh, so yeah, this is where I'm getting really stuck on this one, because I think they've got some really nice players. I think Jake Neighbours coming through, Cairo and Thomas have shown some really good, um, you know, some really good form last season. You said Cairo, his plus minus are not looking too great. It's defensive works where he's got to
It's
work on a little
disgusting,
bit.
honestly. But
Yeah,
a negative
uh,
38 for basically a point per game player, that's horrendous. That's
yeah,
horrendous. So
yeah. It's not ideal. Um, But yeah, you sort of they've got the pieces there, but the question ultimately lies, if this side that they've put together now, which is a little bit different than what it was last year, not overly that different. The Kevin Hayes situation is really questionable for me. Like, 3.5 is right for the points that he puts up, but if he's a defensive liability again, you don't really want that leaking through, especially with players like Kairu, who have a minus 38 plus minus the season before. You don't really want them to be any more of a defensive liability than they currently are. Jordan Binnington, do they have, especially with the lapses in defense that they've already got, do is Binnington good enough to stand up? Because he signed long term. So this isn't a team that has easily movable assets. that they can sort of flip and turn into a younger side. So retool by moving some of their older players out and bringing in some younger, more youthful players. It's if this doesn't pan out for them this year, I don't know where to go for St. Louis. And looking at this side, I don't see them as a top three side in the Central. Like I don't see them jumping over a Colorado, a Minnesota, or a Dallas. So where are they? And they've still got Winnipeg and Nashville to deal
Mm.
with. So like where is it going for this team? Like what do they have to do? I think, depending on how Verana and Kapanen, how Kevin Hayes moves into this side, we could see a really, really powerful offense. The question will be what can they do on the defensive side? Um, Given the sort of weaker Pacific Division, maybe there's two wildcard spots available for that Central Division. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very, very uncertain of where this team is going, especially from what I saw last year or last season. I'm not sure that they bounce back into the playoffs this season. And for a team that's this old, they've kind of got to be a contender to be
Mm.
worth it. So yeah, if it doesn't happen for them this year, which I can't kind of see happening, what are the decisions that this management are gonna have to make? Because are you just gonna sit there and go, oh, well, we're stuck with these players. We're just going to continue to push this out year in, year out until their contracts are out, and then we'll focus on rebuilding and we'll continue to finish around 18th to 24th for the next 3 or 4 years because we've got a team that's kind of there but not good enough. Like,
Mm.
what are the decisions? Like, I feel like you've got to make that call for whether or not you're going to gut this team or
Well,
you're going to continue to try to push.
yeah, like you look at some of the stats from last year, like they were the fifth most scored against team in the league, so that puts equal fifth, so that puts them in the talking points of Anaheim, Columbus, San Jose, Montreal, and Chicago. Those are not good teams you want to be in talking points, especially with the way this team is built. That is the problem. They score goals, not as much as they need, but they score goals. But it's just they concede way too much, and it really comes down to I just think three key pieces, maybe even four if you want to add in Bennington, because I think he has some attitude problems as well that hurts the team, just moral locker room wise as well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think your three biggest issues in a sense is Kairu, Pareko, and Krug. Those are your biggest issues. You brought in Kevin Hayes, who's probably looking like your number four big issue in regards to your goals conceded, and then you can throw in Binnington there as well. Um, but yeah, like Pareko, well, I'll just pull in some stats. Like Kairu, -38. Kevin Hayes was -22 with Philadelphia. Krug was -26, and Pareko was -19 in plus minus. And you compare that to like they're probably their best defender, and Rosen was a plus 19. So why is your third liner a plus 19 and your first and second liner, um, or I'm imagining they're going to be paired together in Krug and Pareko. Um, why is that like -20 plus, and your third liners in Rosen's getting plus 19? It's just not acceptable. They
And
need to
he only
move it,
played half a season as well.
and yeah, exactly. He did extremely well. He is a UFA at the end of the season. There's another note to make is that they got a lot of UFAs highlighted here to resign. No huge names, um, besides like Kapanen and Verana maybe, but that is just another note to make. I think it's interesting because I don't think Kairu with that negative plus minus is going to do it for you. He's gotten better every year, so maybe he just keeps improving. He just keeps hitting a new ceiling. But my thing is like I would probably threaten these players that, hey, we're going to do a rebuild. Do you want to waive your no trade clause, and we'll try to trade you to somewhat of a competitor. We'll eat half your salary, um, to make it happen, because it's just it's just not getting it done. Like they're good players, but for the contracts they're on, it's not great. The fact you can't move them is not great. And look, the age is not great. Like they got Thomas and Kairu, but that's basically it. That's your core. In regards to young kids or decent players in their prime, everyone else is 30 plus, and they're just going to keep aging, and they're all signed to long term. So, I personally would threaten the rebuild and be like, all right, we're rebuilding. If you want out, throw your no trade clause. Otherwise, you're going to just rot here. So that's how I would go about it. It's not a great way to go about it, in a sense, but you got 1.5 million, and there's so many things that are wrong with this team and needed added. Like they don't even really have a backup goalie. They still need to get a backup.
Mm.
Um, unless they have someone coming through the works that I don't know about, but it's just like they don't have a true first like you said, Sard's on the first line at the moment. Like Butch never had a great year, but do you feel good having him on the first line? Um, it's just not there, and I like they won a cup a few years ago, and that's all well and good, but this team's kind of hit a point where they've lost Tarasenko, O'Reilly, and it's just that core's kind of gone, and they need to build around Thomas and Kairu. Problem being, it's kind of nearly impossible to do that, just with how the assets are done. And then, like you said and you brought up earlier, they're the only real core pieces that don't have no trade clauses. So are they the first pieces that you move for big assets? That's what I'd be looking at.
Mm.
And then you're looking at a full rebuild, because this really is. They finished sixth in their division last year. I consider them sixth in their division this year on paper. I can't see them being better than Nashville, Winnipeg, Minnesota, Dallas, or Colorado. And I could see Arizona or Chicago honestly leapfrogging them if they don't fix their issues, because I don't like what I see on paper anyway.
It's a big concern. I feel like each of these players have potential. Like Brandon Saad, he's been a great player over the years. He's fantastic for Chicago, but he's getting older. Buchnevich, relatively good player, still reasonable age, but um, he is also getting close to that 30 sort of age. Braden Shen, he's been a fantastic servant of this franchise. Um, but again, he's 31 years old. He's getting older. Um, Kevin Hayes, we know he can put up points, but he's got his issues. So we know he's got the ability to score and do some really fantastic things, but he's got his defensive liabilities. Kapanen and Verana has shown that he has the ability to be a fantastic player, if he can keep his you know nose out of trouble. Um, but that's a big question. Can he do that? Yep, he looked good in the 20 games he played to finish the season last year. But is he going to keep that going? Is he going to bounce back? I mean, I was a big fan of this move by St. Louis because I think he's well worth the
Yeah,
risk.
yeah, it's worth the risk.
Because
Yeah,
worst case scenario, you're flipping for assets. And same with Kapanen. Kapanen has shown glimpses of some really good, good hockey. So they've got a team there that has that potential. I mean, Pareko, Falk, Krug, like you could say the same about all of them. Like they've all had glimpses, but again, they're all aging. Krug, Falk, Pareko, Letty, they're all getting older. They're all into their 30s. Um, so they're not going to really be getting better. They're going to be, if anything, they're going to be on the slow decline. So yeah, it's hard to sort of see where to next for these guys. If it, as I said before, if it doesn't happen for them this year, what do you do? Like, because if it doesn't happen this year, I don't think they're magically just going to get better next year with these same players. Like I
Mm.
don't think this is a team that's improving. As you said, you've got to build around Thomas and Kairu, but you can't really build around these two players when all you've got surrounding them is aging players.
Mm.
Like
Like the window
you're
doesn't
not.
line up. They're 24, 25
No,
or
it
something like
doesn't.
that. It doesn't line up.
Exactly. They've got no other real youth coming through to complement these two players with. And, there were already rumors circulating that either a Rob Thomas or a Kyrou was going to be on the move potentially in a trade. Now that didn't end up happening. There was a trade involving Tory Krug that they were mentioned. There was a possibility that one of those two were going to be included in, but Krug ultimately, you know, said
Vetoed it.
no,
What?
said no, not
Why would you
happening.
want to go
Yeah,
from St. Louis
he
to
vetoed
Philly?
the
It's the
trade.
same thing, right? So, like,
Well, exactly. And you probably compared it. I think Philly is much worse than St. Louis, but they're probably in a similar situation of that no man's land. Like the team's not really going to do anything, but it's not built for a rebuild, and they don't want to rebuild, but they probably need to rebuild. So it's like you're in that sort of weird area of just nothingness.
mm,
And yeah, unfortunately, St. Louis. Look, you've got a 2019 Stanley Cup to remember, so it's not like you've done nothing with this team. Um, but I just don't see this side bringing anything to St. Louis anytime soon. And if you're wanting to be any good in the next 5 years, you're gonna need to make some moves and big calls now
yeah.
and
I
or at the end of this season.
I was having to think while you were talking. Like, I think my big move, the first move I make, probably controversial. St. Louis fans will be like, "No, don't do it," or something like that. But my big call, I trade Robert Thomas to Columbus because they need the center. I think that's who I
Mm,
go to, and I reap whatever rewards I can get through that trade. And then that is my signal. And then I go and tell the team, look, we are doing a rebuild. You waive your no trade clauses or you rot here. That's basically the threat you make. And then you obviously try not trading Krug to a Philly. You try send them to a maybe in Nashville, like teams that just on the brink or slightly in a retool. They're willing more will be more willing to accept those type of teams compared to a Philly who is definitely in a full blown rebuild. Um, and then you go, all right, we just got rid of Robert Thomas. Now we move on to getting rid of Cairo, and then you basically strip everything because I think this team needs to be stripped. It's too
mm.
aging that like they have a 3 year window essentially of like win the cup, but I don't see this team winning the cup at all. Not this year,
No.
eh, not next year, not with the salary cap that they've got. Like 1.5 million to add something in, and that's probably going to go towards like a backup goalie. Uh, so you basically got nothing to add onto your forward or your defensive line. And look, you got great depth in Rosen, which Nevich has been good and whatnot, but it's just not going to get the job done. You got too many expensive contracts that probably need to be moved, and yeah, I just think you either your big trade is either Robert Thomas or Kairu, and then you try and get Bennington to waive his clause and try and move that contract. Eat half the contract of all these players, and that way you stay above the bottom of the salary cap, but also you can have all these youngsters and prospects come in and play.
Yeah, I think you're on the money there. That Rob Thomas one. It's always difficult when you're talking about trading out your best player, and Rob
Yeah,
Thomas is only 24, so he probably would be a big important piece for their rebuild. But yeah, you do have to ask the question, if you could move a Rob Thomas to a Columbus, like you said, who is desperately in need for that top line sort of center. They've got some pretty good youth coming through, um, that you could sort of look at packaging, right? Like, some of the players they've got, Texera, who should be back in the lineup this year, hopefully. Kent Johnson, Marchenko, Sillinger. I know he had a pretty down year last year, but he's still, they're all 20 years old. Texera is 23. But then, yeah, even if you go into their non-roster sort of prospects, I don't think you're going to get a Fantilli back
Nah.
in return. But they've still got some other players down there, especially defense-wise. You got Juric, Matiek, Matiuk, who they've just picked up as well in the draft. He's they're first round picks. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like you've got yeah, you might be on something. I don't think they do it. I don't
Oh,
think they'll make
I
the
don't
call. I
think they
don't think
do
they'll
it.
have
I
the
think the
balls to do it.
Kevin
Um,
Hayes situation sealed that they're not going to do it. I feel like they're going to do this
yeah.
three-year window thing, waste the primes of Thomas and Cairo in a sense, and then don't have the assets to build a team around them because all your assets are gone for nothing. Because at 3 years, I don't think you get much for a Falk or a Letty or a Krug, um, or
Mm,
Bennington. So they're going to waste all of their assets. They're not going to have much. Like the only good thing is they got all their draft picks. Besides, I think it's like a sixth round this year. Other than that, in the next 3 years,
yeah.
they got all their picks. So they have that, and I just don't think it's going to be enough. Like they got the number 10 overall this year, and I feel like you've got to like they're kind of eating this bullet of we're going to stay mediocre and not either not drop and get the big pick and then get good again, or just go full ham and get that really good team and get the cup. But they can't do that because of the assets they have. So
Mm,
I personally only see a rebuild. I know that's not what they're going to do. They're going to do this 3 year window of trying, but that's what it looks like they're trying to do anyway. And I don't completely agree with it. We'll see if it works out. I think the central division is like it's the weakest probably in the league. Though I think Nashville, Winnipeg, and whatnot, they'll retool. You have Arizona at some point is going to come bang with all the assets, and Chicago just got the best player, so it's not looking good for you. You're basically looking like the worst team at this point because Chicago got Bedard, Arizona's getting has all the assets prospering. It's just they don't have the stadium. So you're looking like at a 6 to 8 team in your division, and I can't see them getting any better than that unless you bring in some
yeah.
coach that does something crazy.
Yeah. Look, we hate to be too bleak towards your side, St. Louis fans, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to go from here. I mean, they might prove us wrong and have an absolute stellar season with some of these new moves. And it might be a refresh side and they may go on to be a real threat, but it's still the same. Like even if they did finish top three this year and had a reasonable playoff run, they're still another year older. And again, I don't think they're getting better. Um, as the years progress. So I think you slowly see the decline. So as you said before, it's probably a 2 to 3 year window to win the cup at most. But the question is can this side do it? And at this point in time, I can't see it. So yeah, I feel like it's going to be heartache for the St. Louis fans for the next couple of years, whilst they continue to try and push to be relevant, until they potentially come to the realization, similar to what Philadelphia have, that it's just not going to happen, and you need to make a call now before you
Mm,
waste more seasons of the likes of Rob Thomas and Kyrou and the rest of them. So
mm.
yeah, definitely interesting times ahead for St. Louis Blues.
Yeah. No, I hope it all works out. It doesn't look like it will, but at least they'll be fighting for it, and at least this season anyway. But yeah, let us know what you think. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave notifications on, and yeah, just comment below what you think of St. Louis and their situation. Would you do a hard rebuild and remove Thomas and Kyrou for assets, or would you stay course and stay this plan for the next 2-3 years? But yeah, let us know. And until next video, we'll catch you guys.
See you guys.